Thank you very much for coming. We're going to put on a presentation that we've not done in the past. This is about my 10th or so Meet the Fed, but we thought we would try kind of a new venue because we always seem to have questions that people ask that we never have time for in the main presentation. So what this breakout is going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about human intelligence, where law enforcement gets some intelligence from, and because of my relationship since I've retired, I do a lot of security research. I want to talk very specifically to those of you that do computer security research and how you can leverage some of that data towards making the bad guy's life as miserable as possible. By way of introduction, my name is Andrew Freed. I retired about 2 years ago from Treasury. Before that, my organization was actually part of IRS. And I spent most of my time, of the 20 years, doing computer security work, primarily any type of network fraud, phishing, malware, DDoS, anything that affected the IRS, I pretty much did. And I started doing this from a very, very long time ago. I have been around since things were out before there was a thing called DOS, but most of the work we do now is done on Unix systems, on large, scaled out co-location facilities, and we still work with the people in the offices, the federal agents, that are still trying to do the same work on little laptops. But what we have started to do very effectively in the last few years is to reach out to the community and get information. So before we really get into the meat of this, I'm going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves. This is like a really informal thing. It's going to be your opportunity to ask pretty much anything you want to know. I don't have any expertise on UFOs, although don't hesitate to ask. Maybe somebody in the audience would like to entertain the answer. But we do want to make this interactive, so if you have a question, we'd ask you just come up to the microphone so that everybody in the room can hear your question, and it makes more sense to the people in the back what we're talking about most of the time. If there's anything that you specifically want us to cover and it's not a question, feel free to come up to the microphone. But essentially what we're going to focus in is where federal agents, other agencies get their intelligence to conduct criminal cases. Most of you are probably aware that there's two ways to work in criminal investigation. One is to follow the evidence, which is generally going to be records and logs and things like that. And the second is the human people that will come forward and say, hey, not for nothing, but do you know about this? Or I saw this and I think you should know about it. Right now, I've spent most of my time since about September of 2009 chasing a couple of the botnets, one of which is Zeus. And everybody here familiar with Zeus? Anybody here not familiar with Zeus? Okay. Zeus is a pretty prolific problem out there right now. It's a large botnet, and the organization behind it probably has about 150 members that we know of. So working in that kind of an arena, it's international in scope, and it's very difficult for American law enforcement to subpoena people in foreign countries. The mechanisms are out there to use things like MLATs to make requests to the foreign government. The problem is when you're chasing computer crime, getting a return on your question 6 months later doesn't work well. So what has happened over the last 5 or so years has been pretty unprecedented that many of the law enforcement agencies that are involved in this are now helping each other and are getting a lot of the information through the informants in different countries. So that's kind of where my perspective is coming from what's happening right now. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and make sure the mic's on.
Sure. Oh, good afternoon. My name is John O'Donoghue. I hope you all had a nice lunch and ready to engage in a good conversation. I know I am, so I might start asking you guys questions. I was just on the panel earlier talking about cyber deterrence and sort of some policy issues that enable anybody that is involved with cyber to do their job most effectively. For this panel alone, I'd like to just focus on what is, from my background, what is manhunting? I was a Navy SEAL. I spent almost a decade in the community. I have a pretty different, varied background, but a lot of it involves computer science, artificial intelligence, things like that. And the special operations community in general continues to combine technologies in the cyber realm with physical operations. So most of my time has been spent in developing those types of strategies, and that's some of the things I wanted to share with you today, what I can, and some perspectives. I probably differ from most conventional thought in thinking that we can operate in cyberspace like we do maybe in Fallujah or in Mosul or something like that. We can't go through an alleyway in a tank when we're getting shot at by people in civilian clothes. We can't geographically bifurcate and divide up the internet and make it nice and neat so we understand it better. We can't expect people to be attributable, to have usernames. So how do we operate in that space? I'm not sure I have the answer, but I do have some mechanisms and some processes and some attributes and components that we have done at the very tactical level, looking for bad guys overseas. And when you combine all these attributes, you really build what I call a full spectrum capability. And that part of that spectrum involves cyber. So I ask you, as you listen and you bring up some ideas and some things back to yourselves, just remember that most everything, including some people's espresso makers at their house, are connected to the internet. And keep that in mind, both from a security background, but also an exploitive background if you're in the law enforcement industry or you're just doing collective business intelligence. So if it's connected, it's accessible. And all of that adds to a greater end state as you continue to try to look for people or organizations of interest. So I enjoy speaking and answering questions off the cuff, so I hope you guys fire some off. If not, I'm going to start asking you some. Great.
My name is Kevin Manson. I'm a webaholic. You're supposed to say hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Thank you. Okay. Think about this. You know, they got a place called Webaholics Anonymous on the internet. It's like having AA meetings in a bar. Okay, well, let's see. This says ex-FLETC. Any of you in this room know what FLET stands for? Okay. Do I have any cops in here? Any cops? Undercover types? Please raise your hand. I'll take your picture. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are involved directly with law enforcement? Would you please raise your hand if you are? They always stay. Always cops are always in the back. There must be some donuts back there. Okay. How about academia? Nobody from academia. Okay, a couple. Okay. And the rest, I assume, are. How about .mil? How about .mil? Few. Okay. The rest of you all .coms? Raise your hand if you're a .com. Okay. All right. I agree, basically what John said. I'm going to ask you as many questions as you're going to ask me because I increasingly realize that I learn more from these sessions than I probably teach. By trade, I'm a trainer, I guess is the best way to describe myself. I spent 20 years at a place called the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and I was privileged to be able to be at the hub of a group that had about 80 different spokes in it. Every federal agency except DEA and FBI that trains someone coming out of college to be a federal agent trained at the facility that I was located at. And it's located in southeast Georgia. It's an old naval air station. They had blimps. They used to fly out of those during World War II looking for submarines, and they were sinking, tonnage off the coast of Georgia out there. And I'm very fortunate to live in a nice place called St. Simon's Island. Our local player pro is Davis Love, for those of you who are golfers. I was privileged also to train probably close to 100,000 federal agents during that 20-year period. And my shtick was training cops how to obey the law while to enforce it. And it was my privilege to teach constitutional law, which is really my favorite topic. And many years ago, I worked at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and I always try to go back and visit those very historic documents every time I go back there. Today what I'm doing is I'm consulting with a company called NC4. It's the National Crisis Continuity Coordination Center. And this group is involved with a number of very interesting projects dealing with business continuity. And they also are managing a number of online portals to include the US CERT portal and portals for the NCIS, Pentagon Force Protection Agency, ICE, and others. And 10 years ago, I was very privileged to meet a fellow at DARPA by the name of Matt Donlin, and Matt and I shook hands and we created this thing called the CyberCop portal. And thanks to a very good friend of mine who I've been mind melding with for the last 10 years, George Johnson, who is the fellow who wrote the code there. We have about 15,000 users currently, and the purpose of that portal is it's a PDD3 initiative, basically, PDD 63, to allow information to be shared in a relatively secure environment or protected environment between law enforcement and industry. And I don't know if we're going to have another round, or Jim said I needed to fill a little more time. That's usually just the opposite. Usually he wants me to keep my remarks short. But I do have them in writing up here. And if I have a chance, I'll read it. It's less than a page. So, thanks. Lynn?
Thank you. My name is Lynn Wells. I'm now a fuzzy-headed academic at National Defense University in Washington. Before that, actually, I've spent 47 years in the Department of Defense, and which 26 years in the Naval Service, and then the remainder in Office Secretary of Defense. Spent a couple of years acting as the Chief Information Officer for DoD. But I have no background in law enforcement. And so the observation I'd make on the human side of the cybersecurity piece is I was with with Lou Gerstner some years ago when he was the CEO of IBM. And he said, how would I know if I had an effective information security program? So the answer was walk down the hall, find a random employee, ask them 3 questions. Would you know if your computer was being screwed with? If yes, would you know who to call to find out how to fix it? If yes, would you care enough to call? And the point was, unless you can answer yes for every employee in your organization, you can spend all the money you want to on technology and you're going to fail on the people side. And I think this is an area where we in this whole cybersecurity world are not paying nearly enough attention. Some years ago, I went up to New York with a group of industry analysts who were going to present the story of their companies to some Wall Street analysts to get, good stock ratings or something, so discount half of what I'm going to say. But the point that they made was that we industry can provide you customer, with any level of security you'd like. All we need is 3 things. We need a commitment from the top that security is important. And I don't mean the once-a-year letter that says security is important. I mean a genuine commitment. You have to be willing to spend money, and I don't mean the one-time purchase of firewalls and guards. I mean the ongoing operations and maintenance to maintain near real-time situational awareness of what's happening in your network. And you got to be willing to drop the hammer on people who don't play by the rules. And I would argue that in government, we are miserable at this. It is much easier for me to get a security violation by leaving my safe open today than by doing something really stupid with my modem. So as we go into the discussion, I'd really be interested in hearing, as we move into a world of mobile apps and sort of cloud computing and internet and all kind of transmedia applications on mobile devices, and people are emailing to themselves the corporate marketing data and all the crown jewels, which instead of being protected by 2-factor authentication in the cloud are now protected by a 4-digit PIN on your iPhone. I mean, how you get around the fact that people are the weakest link in this whole security process. So, thank you, sir.
So, just by a show of hands or shout out, what do you think that the #1 source of human informants is? Anybody have an idea? Well, I have no statistical information to tell you this, but I think most law enforcement would tell you that ex-wives are probably the #1. So if you are married or you have a significant other, treat them very, very well, or don't tell them shit. Because that's probably, if you do something wrong, who's going to dime you out?
So Andy, is your wife going to survive the divorce?
I'm not going to answer anything. It's interesting how you get information. The thing that I think most law enforcement, first of all, want to size up when we're dealing with human intelligence